First off, in April, I read The Crypt, Book 1, Shakedown by Scott Sigler. I previously read a Scott Sigler book, ℙ𝕚𝕚𝕚𝕚, that didn't really land well for me. I went into it expecting a cave thriller book because I found it on a list of cave thriller books, but it kind of didn't really turn out to be that. It was more of a techno thriller, and it didn't land well with me. But the imagination on display with some of the aspects was so intense and so interesting that I knew I had to read another Sigler to really figure out whether this was for me or not. And I'm really glad to report that Shakedown, The Crypt Book 1, was phenomenal. It was fantastic. This is the hunt for Red October in space, Das Boot in space. This is a exciting, thrilling military sci-fi book based around a ship that is essentially a submarine in space. Too often, sci-fi stories will have the fleet actions or the spaceship battles be essentially based on World War II naval tactics. You know, big giant ships come up next to each other and throw broadsides at each other. And you know, when you actually think about it in futuristic terms, it doesn't really make much sense, and a lot of books try and hand-wavium that off. But Scott Sigler here has probably the best explanation for why this is the way things have to be done, through the use of, like, space-time warping weaponry, FTL system that makes nuclear weapons and nuclear reactors not function properly. It is really, really well done. And again, the imagination on display that made me so excited to read more of his work is 100% on display here. It is almost a military submarine sci-fi thriller mixed with a cosmic horror eldritch sort of nature. There will be a full video review coming up very soon for this one, but the short plot summary is that it is based on a ship with a huge turnover, a huge casualty rate, where the crew is basically made up of press-ganged military people who have no other options left. They've committed crimes, they've disgraced themselves. This is the only ship they can now serve on, and if they serve on it for 2 years, then their previous crimes will be wiped. However, everything about this ship is secretive. Everything about this ship is top secret. Everything about this ship is very strange. I don't want to spoil too much. I don't want to talk too much because I will have a full video review coming up. But if you're a fan of space operas, if you're a fan of military sci-fi, if you're a fan of cosmic horror and sort of eldritch nature things, then this is one to check out for you. This gets an easy 4 or 5 stars from me, and be on the lookout for the full video review coming up soon. Up next is another book I adored, and it introduced me to a word I didn't know existed, but is absolutely my jam. That word is incense punk. Basically, when your book revolves around that sort of religious, overt tones and themes, you know, the many candles and the censers full of incense and that sort of like Catholic-leaning thing. I would put a lot of Warhammer books into that category. But the book today is The Hand of God by Yuval Kordov. Set in a post-apocalyptic world where there has been 2 apocalypses. One caused by men and their greed and their avarice and their war and their violence. Man destroyed the world with nuclear weapons, AI weaponry, climate change, all of that. And then as punishment, God destroyed the world again. Now, many, many, many years after this, we are left with basically 3 disparate groups of humanity. The first is Bastion, this overtly militaristic religious group where groups of soldiers will also have embedded priests with them. It's not stated to be very Catholic, but it is very Catholic feeling. It feels kind of crusade-y, and everything in Bastion society seems to be set up to help defend the city and to help support this military group. Next, we have the Union, this disparate set of tribes and families that live in basically the wastes, who are scavengers and who are very core and very central to the inciting incidents in this book. And then finally, we have probably the most interesting of all of them is Cathedral. Known as the Last City, this is led by a very long-lived, perhaps immortal character known as Esther, who we see in this book, who leads the sea in a religious fervor, who talks with the Messiah, who comes across as very religious, but the actions that take place within Cathedral have a very dark, a very evil-seeming feeling. And all 3 of these groups of humanity are trying to survive in a world where demons exist, where demons roam the wastes, where hell mouths open and demons spill forth. And it is really the demons here that are the most imaginative. They are the most non-human, the most non-of-our-world demons I've ever seen written. They aren't just like little imps and goblins and whatnot. They come in all different shapes and sizes, and they're all these blends of mechanical and biological. They don't stay in one place at once. They don't walk with steps. It's like their feet are sliding on the ground, but they sort of phase in and out of reality because they're not built to exist within our existence. And with all these factions in play, the novel blends really thrilling sci-fi writing, really interesting character work, deep philosophical questions, very interesting thoughts about religion, as well as, yes, giant big war mechs. The world building is fantastic. The prose is lyrical and beautiful. Hand of God by Yuval Kordov gets 5 stars from me and is almost certainly getting a full review of its own. Next up, a book with some of the best world building I've ever seen, and it is Shroud by Adrian Tchaikovsky. Children of Time got the 8th spot in my top 15 sci-fi books of all time video I just did recently, 𝕬𝕬𝕜, and Shroud continues displaying the imagination and the world building that he is so good at. Really, April was a month of super imaginative books for me, because the alien race displayed in Shroud is, again, one of the just most mind-blowing, most interesting depictions of otherness that I've ever seen, of an organism that is just so unlike our own that it is difficult to even comprehend. The plot of Shroud is essentially that humanity has come to this new solar system looking to develop it for its corporate overlords, and they found a moon that is emanating radio signals, electromagnetic radiation, just sort of screaming into the void. The world itself is completely pitch black. There is almost no light. It is very heavy gravity. The air pressure is insane. The air makeup is toxic. And yet, from probe readings, it looks like there might be something living there. Eventually, we end up with a couple characters stranded on this moon, and then we flip back and forth between a chapter of them trying to figure out how to survive and how to escape, and then we see these same events, but from the point of view of the aliens that are on the moon. And it's this flipping back and forth between the two that really makes Shroud shine for me, because it lets you see events from the human perspective as they try and figure out what these aliens are doing, what's going on, why are they acting this way. And then you see from the alien perspective and you find out what the aliens were doing, and you see them being like, what are the humans doing? Why are they acting this way? It doesn't make any sense. And the way these two very different intelligences are projecting their own way of life, their own thought processes and their own emotions onto the other, despite them just being so completely different that they can't understand, that is really fascinating. And the confusion and the difference of opinions of what each other's doing between these two chapters is fantastic. The book does drag a tiny bit for me in the middle, but it's not a big problem. This does get 4 stars from me. I thought it was really fantastic. And I just can't believe Adrian Tchaikovsky can write so many books. I also finally got back to Wheel of Time. I read the 3rd book in the series, The Dragon Reborn, and I thought it was pretty good. I think it's my least favorite so far. I think my rating would probably go Great Hunt, Eye of the World, Dragon Reborn. But it's still very high. It's not a low rating. I'm still giving it 4 stars. It differs a lot from the previous 2 books by not having our main character as a viewpoint character for basically any of the book. And we shift our focus onto some characters that I do think needed some more time in the spotlight. So that is refreshing. The prose remains good. The writing remains very engaging. The characters still develop and are very interesting. But I couldn't help but feel for most of the book that not much really happens. It's kind of meandering. We're kind of just moving people into place again, which is kind of what we were doing in book 1 and to a lesser extent book 2. I feel the lack of our main character, or the main character in the previous 2 books as a viewpoint here, might actually hurt the series more than it helps it. And yet, despite this, despite my issues with it, I was still gripped and enthralled the entire way through. I will have a full video with full spoilers talking about this one, but I did enjoy it. I give it 4 stars, and I am really excited to get to book 4. And finally, last month, the TBR Jar said we would read Ball Lightning by Cixin Liu. And I really didn't like it. Cixin Liu's biggest problem in the 3 Body Problem series is that the characters are very meh, pretty two-dimensional, pretty cardboard. But the sci-fi ideas and the concepts and the action stuff that's going on in that series is what makes it fantastic. In fact, I gave The Dark Forest a very high rating in my top 15 sci-fi videos book. 2nd, 𝕬𝕬𝕜. And in Ball Lightning, the same is true. The characters are very meh. They might even be less interesting than the ones in the Three Body Problem series, but the science concepts and the sci-fi stuff that's going on is just nowhere near the sort of mind-blowing level that we get in the Remembrance of Earth Past series. And overall, I found it pretty dull. I also found a lot of character motivations very questionable. I found a lot of character actions very questionable. And while the scientific explanations are very detailed and you go fairly deep into the process of it, it just isn't very entertaining. I found myself quite bored by most of it. And so I ended up giving it 1 star. It really wasn't for me. Not only was this one not for me, it actually makes me question whether I should be reading Cixin Liu's other work. Remembrance of Earth Past will go down for all time as one of my favorite sci-fi series ever, but now I was excited to get to the Supernova generation. I was excited to get to the Wandering Earth, but now I'm thinking that maybe I won't. I don't know. Thank you guys so much for watching if you still are. It's just a reminder to hit the subscribe button if you like science fiction, horror, fantasy books. That's all we do here. But before we finish up, we have to pick a new book. So here's the TBR jar. Give it a good shake. Let's get this one. Let me put the jar down. Ooh, that's exciting. Oh, can we see it? There we go. Silver Nitrate. Mexican Gothic is one of my favorite horror books I've ever read. And Silver Nitrate is also by Silvia Moreno Garcia. And so I'm really excited to get to this one. This is, I think, about like a cursed Nazi horror film and about trying to finish it and about the events that go on around it. And so I am so excited to get to it. I was so excited when I saw it in the bookstore because I didn't even know it was coming out. This is probably my next read and there will be a review coming up soon. How was April for you guys? Did you guys read more books than I only read 5 books, which is a lot, but less than the last few months. But that being said, I really only had kind of 1 dud in there and the rest of them were fantastic. So, are there any of the videos I've talked about today that you want a full review for? I am planning on reviewing most of them. Let me know. I have been very slow and slack at getting to my reviews, but there will hopefully be more coming up soon. So, thank you so much for watching. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. But most of all, remember to keep reading. Thanks so much. Ciao.